Welcome to IQriously. Get comfortable. Take a slow breath. Tonight, we're going to explore something extraordinary together. Something that is happening right now, inside your skull, without your permission, without your awareness, without any effort from you at all. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just listen. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. What is the most complicated object in the known universe? Not a galaxy. Not a supernova. Not the intricate orbital dance of a solar system. The most complicated object we have ever encountered. The most complex structure that science has ever attempted to understand is sitting inside your head right now. 3 pounds. The size of 2 fists pressed together. The texture, apparently, of firm jelly. The human brain. Inside that 3-pound mass of soft tissue, there are approximately 86 billion neurons. Individual nerve cells. 86 billion of them. To put that number in perspective, if you counted 1 neuron per second, without stopping, without sleeping, it would take you over 2,700 years to finish counting. And each of those 86 billion neurons is connected to thousands of others. The total number of connections called synapses is estimated at around 100 trillion. 100 trillion connections. In 3 pounds of jelly. It has been said that the number of possible states the human brain can occupy is greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe. We have sent probes to the edge of the solar system. We have mapped the ocean floor. We have split the atom and decoded the genome. And yet the organ doing all of that thinking, the thing making all of that possible, remains, in many of its deepest functions, a profound mystery. Tonight, we're going to explore what we do know. And some of it is more extraordinary than anything science fiction has ever imagined. Before we go deeper, let's get a clear picture of what we're actually talking about. The brain is an organ made of cells, like every other part of your body. But the cells of the brain are unlike cells anywhere else. The primary workers are neurons, nerve cells. Each neuron is a tiny electrical device. It receives signals from other neurons through branching fibers called dendrites. It processes those signals. And if the combined signal is strong enough, it fires, sending an electrical pulse racing down a long fiber called an axon to its neighbors. This firing happens fast. Brain signals can travel at speeds of up to 350 miles per hour. Faster than the fastest formula. 1 car ever built. And this is happening constantly. Right now. Millions of neurons firing in cascading patterns of electrical activity every second of every minute of every day of your life. Even when you are asleep. In fact, and this is something worth pausing on, your brain never truly switches off. It cannot. The moment it did, you would cease to exist. Alongside the neurons are another set of cells called glial cells. For a long time, scientists thought glial cells were simply a kind of scaffolding structural support for the neurons, nothing more. The word glia actually comes from the Greek for glue. We now know that glial cells do far more than hold things together. They regulate the chemical environment around neurons. They help form and maintain the connections between them. Some of them, the microglia, act as the brain's immune system, patrolling for damage and clearing out debris. And here is a surprising fact about the composition of the brain itself. 60% of its dry weight is fat. The human brain is the fattiest organ in the body. Those fatty acids are absolutely essential for brain function, which is one reason why severe dietary fat restriction can affect cognitive performance. The brain is also 73% water, which means that even mild dehydration, as little as 2% below optimal, can noticeably affect your attention, your memory, and your ability to think clearly. Drink your water. Your brain is asking you to. Now let's take a slow tour through the brain's geography. Because the brain is not one thing, it is many things, layered on top of each other over millions of years of evolution. Think of it as a building with several floors. Each floor was added at a different point in evolutionary history, and each floor has its own distinct job. The lowest floor, the most ancient part, is the brainstem. Sitting at the base of the brain, connecting it to the spinal cord, the brainstem controls the things that keep you alive without any conscious effort on your part. Breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, the basic rhythms of life. You do not decide to breathe. Your brainstem decides for you. And it has been making that decision, without interruption, since the moment you were born. Above the brainstem sits the cerebellum, the little brain. Despite its modest name, the cerebellum contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. It coordinates movement, balance, and fine motor control. When you reach for a glass of water in the dark and your hand finds it perfectly, that is your cerebellum at work. Above that is the limbic system, often called the emotional brain. This is where your feelings live, where fear is processed, where pleasure is registered, where the urge to connect with other humans originates. The amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure deep inside the limbic system, is your brain's alarm bell. It scans constantly for threats. When it detects danger, real or imagined, it triggers the fight or flight response in milliseconds. Long before your conscious mind has had time to process what is happening, your heart is already racing. Also within the limbic system is the hippocampus, named for its resemblance to a seahorse. The hippocampus is central to the formation of new memories. Without it, you cannot convert short-term experiences into long-term recollections. There is a famous patient in neuroscience history known simply as HM. His full name, Henry Mollison, was only revealed after his death. In 1953, surgeons removed most of his hippocampus in an attempt to treat severe epilepsy. It worked. The epilepsy was controlled. But HM lost the ability to form any new long-term memories. For the rest of his life, he died in 2008. Every morning was his first. Every person he met was a stranger, even if he had met them 1,000 times before. He could learn new physical skills. His procedural memory, stored elsewhere in the brain, remained intact. But each morning, he had no recollection of having learned them. He taught neuroscience more than almost any experiment ever conducted, and he never knew it. Above all of this sits the crowning glory of the human brain. The cerebrum, and specifically its outer layer, the cerebral cortex. This is what makes us human. The cerebral cortex is the deeply wrinkled, folded outer layer of the brain, those familiar grey folds you see in every illustration. Those folds are not decorative. They are a solution to a problem. Evolution wanted to give us more cortex, more processing power. But the skull can only be so large. So the cortex folded in on itself, like a crumpled piece of paper, packing an enormous surface area into a relatively small space. If you unfolded the human cerebral cortex completely, it would cover roughly the same area as a large pizza. About 2.5 square feet of tissue packed into the space of your head. This is where conscious thought lives. Language, planning, abstract reasoning, imagination, empathy, art, music, mathematics. Everything that we consider uniquely human emerges from this thin, wrinkled sheet of grey tissue. Here is something that might surprise you. Your brain accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of all the energy your body produces. 20%. For 2% of the mass. The brain is extraordinarily expensive, in biological terms. It demands a constant, uninterrupted supply of oxygen and glucose. Cut off that supply for even a few minutes, as happens in a stroke, and brain cells begin to die at a rate of nearly 2 million per minute. This energy demand is part of why sleep is not optional, not a luxury, not something you can meaningfully trade away for extra hours of productivity. Sleep is when the brain does its maintenance. In 2013, a team of researchers discovered something remarkable. The brain has its own waste disposal system, a network of channels that open up almost exclusively during sleep, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flush through the brain tissue and clear out the toxic byproducts of a day's worth of neural activity. One of the proteins this system clears away is called beta amyloid. And the accumulation of beta amyloid in the brain is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. In other words, when you sleep, your brain is quite literally washing itself, clearing out the metabolic debris of the day, preparing itself to function again tomorrow. Chronic sleep deprivation does not just make you tired, it leaves that waste accumulating, night after night, building up in the tissue. Which means that right now, as you listen to this, drifting towards sleep, you are doing something genuinely good for your brain. Something it has been waiting for all day. Of all the brain's functions, memory might be the most fascinating and the most misunderstood. We tend to think of memory like a recording, a filing cabinet. Something happens, the brain records it, and later we play it back. But that is not how memory works at all. Every time you remember something, you are not playing back a recording. You are reconstructing it, rebuilding it from fragments, filling in the gaps with inference and imagination, coloring it with your current mood and knowledge. Memory is not a photograph. It is a painting. And every time you look at it, you repaint it slightly. This is why eyewitness testimony is far less reliable than courts have historically assumed. Two people who witnessed the same event will remember it differently, and each of them will be absolutely certain that their version is correct. The brain stores different types of memory in different ways and different places. Episodic memory is your personal autobiography. The memory of events, your first day at school, a holiday you took, a conversation you had last week. This type of memory is rich with context. You don't just remember what happened. You remember where you were, how you felt, what the light was like. Semantic memory is your store of facts and knowledge. The capital of France. What a bicycle looks like. How to multiply numbers. This type of memory is stripped of personal context. You know that Paris is the capital of France, but you probably cannot remember the moment you learned it. Procedural memory is the memory of how to do things. How to ride a bike, how to type, how to swim. Once procedural memories are formed, they become almost automatic. You do not have to consciously remember how to ride a bike, your body simply does it. And then there is working memory, the brain's mental scratchpad. The small amount of information you can hold in your conscious awareness at any one moment. Most people can hold roughly 7 pieces of information in working memory at once, plus or minus 2. Working memory is where thinking happens, where you hold a phone number in your head while you dial it, where you keep track of a conversation while formulating your response. It is also the part of your brain that is most disrupted by tiredness, stress, and distraction, which is why, when you are exhausted, the world feels harder to process. You are not imagining it. Your scratch pad is full. So how does a moment in time become a memory? It begins with experience. Something happens. Your senses take it in. The light, the sound, the smell, the emotional weight of the moment. Neurons fire in a particular pattern, a constellation of electrical activity that represents that specific experience. For the memory to be stored, those neurons need to strengthen their connections to each other. This process is called long-term potentiation. The more often a particular set of neurons fire together, the stronger the connections between them become. This is the basis of the famous neuroscience principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. But this strengthening does not happen instantly. It takes time. And it happens mostly during sleep. While you sleep, your brain replays the experiences of the day. Not consciously, you are not aware of it happening. But in the deeper layers of neural activity, the events of your waking hours are being reviewed, sorted, and consolidated. Important memories are strengthened. Unimportant ones are allowed to fade. Connections are formed between new experiences and existing knowledge, weaving the new into the fabric of what you already know. This is one reason why sleeping on a problem genuinely works. You go to bed stuck. You wake up with the answer. During sleep, your brain has been working on it, finding connections you couldn't find when you were awake and trying too hard. It is also why studying all night before an exam is counterproductive. Without sleep, the memories you've built during study cannot properly consolidate. You arrive at the exam with information that is, in a very literal sense, not yet fully stored. Sleep is not the enemy of learning. It is the mechanism by which learning becomes permanent. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures who occasionally feel emotions. The science suggests the opposite is closer to the truth. We are emotional creatures who occasionally reason. The emotional systems of the brain are older, faster, and in many ways more powerful than the rational systems. When your amygdala fires a fear response, it does so in milliseconds, long before your prefrontal cortex has had time to evaluate whether the threat is real. This made perfect sense on the African savanna 2 million years ago. If you heard a rustle in the grass and waited to rationally evaluate whether it was a lion before running, you were the one who got eaten. The ones who ran first and thought second survived. We are the descendants of the ones who ran, which means we carry, in our ancient limbic systems, a set of hair-trigger threat responses that are not particularly well calibrated for the modern world. The amygdala cannot easily tell the difference between a physical threat and a social one, between a lion in the grass and a critical email from your manager. It responds to both with the same cascade of stress hormones, the same racing heart, the same narrowing of focus. Emotions are not separate from thought. They are deeply woven into it. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied patients with damage to the emotional centers of the brain. People who had, through injury or illness, lost the ability to feel emotions properly. You might expect that without emotions clouding their judgment, these patients would make better decisions. The opposite was true. Without emotional input, they became paralyzed by even the simplest choices. What to have for lunch? Which pen to use? Whether to schedule a meeting on Tuesday or Wednesday? It turned out that emotions are not just feelings. They are a guidance system, a way of rapidly evaluating options and nudging us towards choices that align with our values and past experiences. Without them, reason alone is not enough. For most of human history, scientists believed that the brain was essentially fixed by adulthood. You were born with a certain number of neurons. You lost some as you aged, and the basic architecture of your brain, the connections, the pathways, the structure, was largely set in stone by the time you reached your mid-20s. This turned out to be almost entirely wrong. The brain is plastic. Not plastic in the sense of the material plastic, in the sense of malleable, changeable, capable of being reshaped by experience throughout your entire life. This property is called neuroplasticity, and it is one of the most exciting discoveries in modern neuroscience. Every time you learn something new, your brain physically changes. New synaptic connections are formed. Existing connections are strengthened or weakened. In some regions, entirely new neurons can even be generated, a process called neurogenesis that scientists once believed was impossible in adult brains. One of the most famous demonstrations of neuroplasticity involved the taxi drivers of London. To earn a taxi license in London, drivers must memorize an extraordinary amount of information every street, every landmark, every shortcut across one of the world's most complex cities. This process, called the knowledge, takes on average 3 to 4 years of intensive study. Researchers scanned the brains of London taxi drivers and compared them with non-drivers of similar age and background. They found something remarkable. The taxi drivers had measurably larger hippocampuses, the brain region associated with spatial navigation and memory. The brain had physically grown in response to the demands placed on it, like a muscle responding to exercise. This is not just true of taxi drivers. Every skill you learn, every habit you form, every language you acquire, every instrument you practice, all of it leaves a physical trace in the structure of your brain. You are, in a very literal sense, the sum of your experiences, not just psychologically, physically. Here is something that should be mildly alarming, and yet is somehow also rather comforting. The vast majority of what your brain does, you are completely unaware of. Your brain processes roughly 11 million bits of information every single second. Your conscious mind, the part of you reading these words, thinking these thoughts, processes around 40 to 50 of those bits per second. 40 to 50 out of 11 million. Everything else happens below the surface, in the vast humming machinery of the unconscious. Your body temperature is regulated. Your immune system is managed. The chemical balance of your blood is constantly monitored and adjusted. Thousands of micro-movements keep you upright and balanced as you breathe. All of it happening without your awareness or involvement. But the unconscious is not just doing housekeeping. It is doing sophisticated cognitive work as well. When you meet someone and instantly feel uneasy even though they have said nothing wrong and done nothing suspicious, that is your unconscious brain, processing dozens of subtle social cues and reaching a conclusion before your come. Conscious mind has even registered that something might be off. When a solution to a problem suddenly appears in your mind while you're in the shower, apparently from nowhere, that is your unconscious brain, which has been working on the problem while your conscious mind was occupied with other things, finally surfacing the answer. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote in the 19th century that a man can do what he wants, but he cannot want what he wants. Modern neuroscience has given that observation a biological grounding. Our conscious experience of making decisions is, in many cases, a story we tell ourselves after the fact. The actual decision, or at least the initial impulse towards it, often originates in unconscious neural processes that preceded our awareness of it by fractions of a second. This does not mean we have no agency, but it does mean that the relationship between our conscious selves and the deeper machinery of our brains is far more complex and far more mysterious than we like to imagine. And now, as you lie there listening, perhaps already beginning to drift, let's talk about what happens to your brain when you finally fall asleep. Because the idea that sleep is simply the brain switching off is one of the great myths of popular understanding. The sleeping brain is not inactive. It is differently active, busy with its own particular work. Sleep moves through cycles of roughly 90 minutes. Within each cycle, the brain passes through different stages, each with its own characteristic pattern of electrical activity, its own function, its own strange relationship to consciousness. In the early stages of sleep, the lighter stages, the brain begins to slow its electrical rhythms. The rapid, irregular waves of waking give way to slower, more organized patterns. You are still close to the surface of consciousness. A sound, a light, a touch could bring you back. Then comes deep sleep. Slow wave sleep. The brain's electrical activity slows to long, rolling waves. This is the most physically restorative stage, the stage during which growth hormone is released, tissue is repaired, and the lymphatic system, that waste disposal mechanism we mentioned earlier, does its most vigorous tumbrate work. This is the stage that a long day of physical activity makes you crave most deeply. The stage that alcohol, counterintuitively, suppresses, which is why drinking before bed leaves you feeling unrested even after a full night. And then, cycling back up through the stages, comes REM sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep. REM sleep is one of the strangest phenomena in all of biology. During REM sleep, your brain becomes almost as electrically active as it is when you're wide awake. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, analytical part of the brain, quietens somewhat. But the emotional and visual centers become highly active. And your body is paralyzed. A small structure in the brainstem sends signals down the spinal cord that temporarily disable the motor neurons controlling your limbs. You cannot move. This is believed to be a protective mechanism preventing you from physically acting out your dreams. When this paralysis fails to lift properly as you wake, the result is what is called sleep paralysis. The terrifying experience of being conscious but unable to move, sometimes accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Across cultures and throughout history, sleep paralysis has been interpreted as supernatural visitation. The old hag of Newfoundland folklore, the incubus and succubus of medieval Europe, the kanashibari of Japanese tradition, meaning literally to be bound with metal wire. What those people were experiencing was their own brain, caught between states, dreaming and waking at the same time. During REM sleep, the brain appears to be doing something profoundly important with the emotional content of our memories, processing experiences that carry an emotional charge, integrating them into our broader understanding of ourselves and our world. Some researchers have proposed that REM sleep is essentially overnight emotional therapy, that the brain uses this time to revisit difficult or complex experiences, but in a neurochemical environment that strips away some of the acute stress associated with them, allowing them to be processed more calmly. This may be why, after a night of sleep, an upsetting event often feels more manageable than it did the evening before. The brain has not forgotten it, but it has had a chance to digest it. We have talked about neurons and synapses, about memory and emotion, about sleep and dreams. But there is one question that sits at the very center of brain science, and which remains, even now, almost entirely unanswered. What is consciousness? Not what produces it we know, broadly, that the brain produces it. But what is it? Why does the physical activity of neurons' electrical signals passing between cells give rise to the feeling of being someone? To the experience of seeing red, of tasting coffee, of feeling the warmth of sunlight on your skin? The philosopher David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. And the word hard is doing a lot of work in that phrase. We can explain, at least in principle, how the brain processes visual information, how light hitting the retina is converted to electrical signals that travel to the visual cortex and are decoded into a bar. representation of the world. We can explain the mechanism. What we cannot explain is why that mechanism is accompanied by experience, why there is something it feels like to see, why the lights are on. Some scientists believe consciousness is an emergent property, something that arises automatically from the complexity of neural processing, the way that wetness arises from water molecules even though no individual water molecule is wet. Others believe the brain works more like an antenna, tuning into consciousness rather than generating it. This is a minority view in mainstream science, but it has been proposed by serious thinkers. Some philosophers have argued for panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, present in some basic form in all matter, and that human consciousness is simply a particularly complex expression of something that exists everywhere. None of these theories has been proven. None has even been fully tested. The problem of consciousness sits at the edge of what science currently knows how to ask questions about. And there is something rather beautiful about that. Here you are, a conscious being, using your consciousness to contemplate the mystery of consciousness itself. The brain trying to understand the brain. The universe becoming aware of itself through the medium of 3 pounds of soft tissue behind your eyes. Let's come back to something more grounded. Something that speaks to the lives of everyone listening. The brain is not born finished. It develops, dramatically and continuously, from conception all the way into the mid-20s. In the womb, neurons are generated at an astonishing rate at peak development, roughly 250,000 new neurons every minute. By birth, almost all the neurons you will ever have are already present. But having the neurons is only the beginning. The real work is in connecting them. In the first years of life, the brain forms synaptic connections at a rate that will never be matched again. A toddler's brain has roughly twice as many synaptic connections as an adult brain. This is why young children learn with such breathtaking speed, why they absorb language, music, movement, and social cues almost effortlessly. Then, during childhood and adolescence, the brain begins a process called synaptic pruning. The connections that are used frequently are strengthened. The ones that are rarely activated are trimmed away. Use it or lose it. At a biological level, this pruning continues through adolescence, which explains a great deal about adolescent behavior, incidentally. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and rational judgment, is the last part of the brain to fully mature. It is not fully developed until the mid-20s. Adolescents are not simply being irrational. They are operating with a brain that is literally not yet finished. One that has a fully developed emotional system driving the car, but only a partially developed rational system in the passenger seat. Understanding this does not excuse every bad decision a teenager makes, but it does perhaps invite a little more compassion. And the development does not stop at 25. The brain retains its plasticity, its capacity to change and grow throughout life. New experiences continue to shape it. New learning continues to strengthen it. Even in old age, the brain can form new connections, adapt to damage, and find new routes around old obstacles. The brain is extraordinarily resilient. And yet it is also vulnerable in ways that can change a person's life profoundly. Stroke, the sudden interruption of blood supply to part of the brain, can destroy in minutes what took decades to build. Language, movement, personality, memory, all can be altered or lost depending on which region is affected. And yet the brain's capacity to recover from stroke can also be remarkable. Through neuroplasticity, neighboring regions sometimes take over the functions of damaged ones. Speech therapy, physical therapy, and sheer repetitive practice can, over months and years, help the brain reroute around the damage. The recovery is not always complete, but it is often greater than early predictions suggest. Alzheimer's disease presents a different kind of threat. Rather than a sudden blockage or bleed, Alzheimer's is a slow accumulation. Abnormal proteins building up in the brain tissue over years, gradually disrupting the connections between neurons, eroding memory and eventually personality and identity. It remains one of the great, unsolved problems of medicine. But our growing understanding of the brain, of how those proteins accumulate, of how sleep deprivation may accelerate the process, of the role of the glymphatic system, is opening new avenues of research that would have been unimaginable even 20 years ago. And then there is the quieter, more pervasive threat of chronic stress. Sustained stress floods the brain with cortisol. In small doses, cortisol is useful. It sharpens attention, mobilizes energy, prepares the body for action. But chronic, unrelenting cortisol exposure is damaging. It suppresses the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus. It disrupts memory consolidation. It keeps the amygdala in a state of heightened alert, making it harder to feel safe, to concentrate, to sleep. The brain, evolved for intermittent bursts of stress followed by recovery, struggles with the modern world's habit of making stress continuous. Which is one more reason why what you are doing right now, resting, breathing slowly, letting the day go, is not indulgence. It is maintenance. After everything we have covered tonight, the neurons and synapses, the architecture and plasticity, the memory and emotion and dreaming, it is worth stepping back and acknowledging how much remains unknown. We do not know exactly how general anesthesia works. We know that certain drugs, administered in certain doses, cause a person to lose consciousness. We can reliably produce and reverse unconsciousness millions of times a year, in hospitals around the world. We do not know precisely why it works. At a mechanistic level, the brain under anesthesia remains poorly understood. We do not know why we need to dream. There are strong theories and growing evidence for some of them. But the question of whether dreaming itself serves a purpose or whether it is simply a byproduct of other essential sleep processes is not settled. We do not know how creativity works, what happens in the brain at the moment of genuine insight, why some people seem to generate novel ideas more easily than others, what the neural signature of imagination actually looks like. We do not know what makes a personality, why you are you, why your particular constellation of tendencies, preferences, fears, and loves emerged from your particular combination of genes and experiences. We do not fully understand how language works in the brain, how the meaning of a word or the structure of a sentence is represented in neural activity. We do not know whether there are forms of consciousness we cannot imagine, whether other animals experience the world in ways that would be utterly alien to us or remarkably similar. The brain is the most studied object in the history of science, and it remains the most mysterious. There is something I find quietly wonderful about the fact that you are listening to this. Right now, the organ we have been exploring together all evening is doing something remarkable. It is processing the sound of these words, converting pressure waves in the air into electrical signals, decoding those signals into language, building meaning from sequences of sound, and simultaneously, it is beginning to wind down. The neurons that have been firing most actively during the day are starting to quieten. The chemical environment is shifting, melatonin rising, cortisol falling, the body preparing for that extraordinary period of maintenance and consolidation that we call sleep. Your brain is preparing to clean itself, to sort through the day's memories, to process the emotional residue of everything that happened, to dream. All of that is waiting for you, just on the other side of consciousness. And it will happen without any effort from you. without any planning or intention or will. Because your brain, 3 pounds of the most complex matter in the known universe, knows exactly what to do. It has been doing it every night of your life. Thank you for spending this time with IQriously. Rest well. Your brain will take it from here.